Hello, Mr. Lash.
Chief Wall, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Anything good going on?
It's busy.
Good busy or bad busy?
Good busy. Good busy.
Good. Hey, Mike.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Where do we go from here? And I always get to start things with music, so I got to be super loud and energetic. But let me shut off the music so I can hear you. Good evening, my friends. My name is Benjamin Beaver, and I'm from, I don't want to lift this up too high, but it says Love Akron right there. And we are so excited that you would spend some time tonight with us, building into our community, having the hard conversations. This is brought to you by 100 Black Men, in partnership with Love Akron, and we're excited that you're here. If you could for me real quick, everybody that's on the chat and on Facebook and YouTube, all over the place, if you can just comment in and let us know where you're engaging from. That's a great place to actually just tell us where you're coming from, what's going on tonight, maybe what you had for dinner, or maybe what you're having for dinner. That'd be kind of fun. Um, but go ahead and put that in the chat. Now, that chat is really important both on Facebook as well as here in the Zoom meeting, so you can get your questions in front of our panelists, and you can do that right there. All right, we got an Akron, Ohio. Nice, nice. There we go, Mr. Johnson. Very good. We got Kelly in Akron. Oh, this is good. This is very Akron. Oh, Copley, Greater Akron. Now we're starting to come out. Good, good. I like this. I like this a lot. Those on Facebook over there, man, I love it. Thank you for being here, Ken. Tony, love it, man. All right. Well, now you guys know where the chat is. Very, very cool. I want to actually turn it over to the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Lash, representing 100 Black Men. I love this guy. I just got to know him just this last month. And man, let me tell you, you guys are in for a great ride with him at the wheel. Mr. Lash.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. Thank you to everyone tuning in this evening. Thank you again to Chief Ball and Lieutenant Miller. How are you gentlemen this evening?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. It's great to see you. Chief Ball, I think you're on mute, sir. It's great to see you this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you to all the community partners that we have throughout the community that have just shown such great support over the last month and few weeks after our first initial conversation. So once again, I just want to thank Chief Ball and Lieutenant Miller for joining us once again. And if we can, let's go ahead and jump back into it. In fact, tonight is going to be a little different in the format in that we're going to allow some of our panelists or some of the people that are actually joining us to kind of chime in and join us as a panelist to ask you all some questions that they may have on their mind. Is that okay before we start?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great, great. So we'll just go ahead and start. Chief Ball, Lieutenant Miller, we actually spoke and had this conversation last month, late last month, and what a difference in just a few weeks has made in our country, but both here locally as well. And so I just want to kind of get your assessment on some of the events over the past few weeks and some of the things that have happened here locally, if you want to chime in just for the benefit of our audience. What are you all thinking, being officers and trying to hold the integrity of the profession together, which you all do a great job, but what are you all thinking just seeing some of the things going on in our local society today?
Honestly, we're thinking that it's tough. This is an important job that we have. The work that we do is critical to society operating in the ways that it should. Keeping our citizens safe is something that every person that's ever been sworn in as an officer in the Akron Police Department has, I'm sure, held it very, very close to their heart and believe it's a mission more than a job. And criticism is tough. It certainly, there's been plenty of it for law enforcement as a whole, which makes it very, very difficult when you feel it personally, regardless of whether or not you as a person, the kind of commitment and the way that you conduct yourself and the professionalism you demand. Mike and I are both supervisors in the department, obviously, in the way that we require our subordinates to interact and to do their jobs with integrity. So it's tough to hear some of those criticisms, but at the same time, we also have ownership of the responsibility that we have to put in our best efforts, and it has to be constant. It has to be a part of your culture to where you are listening to the people that you work with and around, that you are in partnership with the community and aware of what their thoughts and feelings are and are trying to grow relationships. and always reaching to see what the next thing is. There's always improvements and ways for us to grow our department, improve relationships, and you got to really chase that. And I think that's one of the things our department does exceptionally well. Mike, why don't you go ahead if you've got comments to add?
Yes, sir. Thank you. To piggyback on what the chief said, in terms of your question, Mr. Lash, what are we thinking in light of some national and current events? It's a humble, chilling reminder with respect to what happened out in San Diego, and some of the things here even more closely related to home. That it's a chilling reminder that the sacrifice that our collective men and women take every day, the commitment, the dedication to serve it, and their passion to serve this community is underscored every time we have a tragedy from a neighboring law enforcement agency. And it also just renews our commitment to do what we're doing here tonight, which is furthering the conversation, because with the overwhelming trust bestowed upon us by the community, there's a accountability component to that. And accountability is really two-sided. It's a double-edged sword. We're here tonight to demonstrate our commitment to furthering that conversation. And like the chief said, we're committed every day to ensuring that our men and women in patrol and the investigative unit from top to bottom, achieve the level of excellence and professionalism every day. And certainly we're not perfect, but where there is a need for a conversation, our ears are open, and we're committed to that conversation.
Thank you very much, both Chief Ball and Lieutenant Miller. And I appreciate those responses. And I know that they're being a manager and or supervisor, it is hard to take criticism, because a lot of us, we go out and we try to do our best on a daily basis. And when, others don't see what our internal effort is, it's kind of hard. And I understand that. How are you all dealing with the criticism that you all are maybe even locally are experiencing or hearing versus the profession nationwide? How are you dealing with that, and what are you thinking about that? Is it justified or is it unjustified? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think what's natural is for us to personalize that and to look at our own organization. And I know, and as you mentioned, you take ownership for it. And, in our organization, for example, we have almost 460 police officers. And that is a great weight to feel the burden for them. Is their work environment as safe as we can possibly make it? Have we given them the training and the supervision and to the level that's going to allow them to go out in the community and excel, to do the things that we want? Have we conveyed enough my vision for the department and the fundamental things about policing, that we are a service organization? Have we really sunk that in the hearts and the minds of our officers? And the reality of it is that sometimes you don't hit. We're not 100%. There are men and women that are infallible. We are not immune to a negative incident taking place. And so there is a great level of concern and fear about what if we had an incident that is similar to some. And, when I say similar to some, I'll answer your question as far as, is that kind of scrutiny deserved? And I would say in instances, it certainly has. But there have been also other instances where, nationally, there are, in different places, there is a jump to accuse, not have information, and a sudden reaction. Lancaster, Pennsylvania is the most recent incident that the nation has looked at. It was a suspect who barged out of an apartment to an officer who was called to that address for a domestic dispute. And the individual had a large knife in his hand, and the officer tried to retreat, tried to create space between he and that suspect. and the suspect was getting closer and closer, and the officer used deadly force. And there were riots in Lancaster that evening. Well, within a very short period of time, the police were able to put out the body-worn camera video that showed exactly what had happened. And that kind of instant reaction is something I think that our country really has to work on. We've got to slow this down. And when officers don't do the right thing, law enforcement organizations and cities need to make sure that the community is seeing that that's going to be handled properly. So some of it is warranted, but again, it's difficult when an individual makes a choice in another jurisdiction or even within ours, and it's not the right choice, or maybe it's even heinous. Like, the first one to really kick off this most recent round of criticism of law enforcement in the George Floyd incident. I don't think that that's reflective. It's certainly not reflective of our organization. And I don't even think it's reflective of the Minneapolis-St. Paul Police Department. It was an individual, and obviously there were other officers on scene that were not doing the right thing as well. And so that does need to get scrutiny. But to label all police officers in every law enforcement agency in being complicit, or that we have horrible intentions, or that we're not caring for our communities, is really unfair. But we don't get a chance to just sit back and say, we can't even win out here. We got to keep moving ahead. We have to continue to pursue those relationships and that level of performance that I talked about previously.
Sure. And Chief Ball, that's the importance of having these types of dialogues and conversations throughout the community, so that the community can hear the other side firsthand, like you just shared right here. Before we actually go any further, we do have a panelist that does have a question, Mrs. Kathy Bear, and I'm going to give her the opportunity to ask that question. Good evening, Mrs. Bear. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Okay, there I am. I didn't know I was going to be on video, so
welcome.
Excuse my appearance. This is my COVID look.
Hey, it's
right?
okay. It's okay. Yes, absolutely.
Obviously, I've been watching the Love Akron Zooms and now these, and I appreciate the effort that all of you are making for our community. And really, I just want to know, how can we as a community support you as a police department? You're taking care of us. What can we do to support you?
Mike, why don't you start?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. I think that's a proximity oriented question. So the closer you are to a situation, say if you observe a police interaction, whether it be a traffic stop, an officer responding to a call, sometimes there are a lot of misconceptions as to, what may be taking place. One, we're charged with, where possible, to provide some information, to provide some context for why we were at a particular scene, why we were at a location, the nature of that call. And that I think in part goes a long way for helping you or the community understand the nature of what that official business was. And that would also fuel and or answer some questions as to the legitimacy of what we may or may not be doing. But what, to a broader point, what can you or the community do is just try to have, and as you do, and there's a large, very large segment of the community that kind of understands, appreciates, and we get that some people may not always agree with our actions, but as a whole, everything, there's one of my captain's mentors shared with me, said, when you have time, take time. So if a situation is not super emergent from a citizen standpoint, it may not always have to lead to a rush to judgment, or, hey, I saw an officer go through a red light, or I saw an officer do that. But, where we can fill in some blanks and provide some information, I think that go a long way for helping citizens understand kind of what took place. And then also, I think it would enhance the understanding and appreciation on the other side.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. Chief Ball, would you like to add on to that at all?
I think Mike did a great job of laying out what can happen, at the scene or where an incident occurred. I think another part of it is we get letters from the community frequently, emails, cards, notes, and I've started a practice of having those sent out to all of our officers in the department for them to know that there is an incredible amount of support and care for the community, or for the police department, from the community. People let us know they're praying for our safety, for our healthy work environment and good relations with the community. And that really is a great pick-me-up. And I've gotten really wonderful response from the officers saying it's making a difference on a daily basis. So hearing, those good feelings is really nice. I think having open and honest conversations with the people that when these topics come up, be a part of those conversations, help you make yourself educated so that what are some of the bigger pictures. Don't repeat a story if you don't know it to be true, if you don't have all the facts. Kind of compel others around you to have some temperance till things play themselves out. And mostly it is, don't judge an entire profession based on the actions of a few people. That doesn't fit in any work environment that there is. Doctors, lawyers, and people kid about the lawyer jokes, and the reality of it is every lawyer is not the same, just like every police officer is not the same. And I've heard a lot of comments about not all cops are bad. No, that's not even close. Not even close. Most police officers are exceptional people that do a job that has an incredible impact in our communities. And there are a handful, and it's a handful, nationally, that shouldn't be in the business. And we need to be making sure that when that becomes known, that we're taking the right steps to make sure that they don't have that privilege any longer. But it's a privilege for us to work for our communities. So those are a few ways that people can help us.
Sure. Thank you for that response. And we actually have another question from Mr. Tony. I can't see his name, but we actually are going to have him question. But I have a question that I would like to ask prior to him coming on. And this question comes from Mr. Ken Logney. And his question is, speak to the number of total police interactions with the public compared to the number of shootings. Also, what starts a call to an officer and what should be expected in that encounter upon arrival? If either of you can speak to that, that is a question coming from Mr. Ken Logney from Copley.
Sure, I can, and I apologize. I'm at my home and not in my office, so I don't have.
Sure.
I have some of the numbers I'm very familiar with, but I don't have them all memorized. But last year, for example, the estimate was 375 million interactions between police and the public responding for calls for service. That's not bumping into somebody and having a casual exchange in a restaurant or on the street. 375 million calls for service. There were 999 people that were killed by officers in the line of duty. Of those, the number of unarmed suspects that were killed, I know the number for African Americans, it was 9 in all of 2019. Breaking that down a little bit further, there was only one African American person that was killed by police that was not armed or actively fighting and resisting an arrest from a police officer. So that number is 0.0000003% of police interactions. And I can tell you for the Akron Police Department, for example, I do know our numbers. And I speak about this publicly frequently. We ask the question when we are putting on trainings for the public or when we're hosting in different ways, how many times do you think that an Akron police officer is needed to use force if we go to 100 calls for service. Some people say, I've heard 75 before, I've heard 50. You hear people that are a little bit, maybe a little bit more coming in that are sympathetic to police or maybe more familiar with officers, and they may say 2 out of 100. Our use of force numbers right now, they're about 1 in 1,000 calls for service. So it is almost 100 times less than what the average perception is. If people believed it was 10% of the time, it's 100 times less than that number where Akron Police Department uses force in order to effect arrest. And that force covers the whole range. It could be a simple takedown, a tackle when somebody's running from you. And it could be OC spray, it could be a taser, all the way up to use of deadly force. And I think we had, I'm sorry, I don't have our number offhand, but less than 0.1%. And as far as complaints that come in against our officers in the department, there's a complaint made every approximately 4,000 calls for service against an officer in the Akron Police Department. Every use of force, every complaint is investigated, and typically we'll have body-worn camera for that because all of our patrol officers that are interacting with the public wear body-worn cameras. I think those numbers are really eye-opening to people who haven't, had the opportunity to see exactly what that is.
Thank you, Chief. We actually had a Mrs. Kelly Urbano. I'm not sure exactly where she went. I think she may have gone away. But we actually, if you have Mr. Edgar Barnett, if you want to actually enter the room, we're going to allow you to ask a question. Mr. Barnett, would you please present your question? Thank you. Would you unmute your phone?
All right, can you hear me?
Barnett?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My question, let's see here, let me get this. Okay. My question was about the situation that happened in Ravenna where the young man was pulled over. He was sitting in his car waiting for a meeting and he was pulled over by someone called who said that he was waving a gun. It almost made national news. That was a family member of mine. He called me that night after it happened. And I was wondering, has police discussed this? Like I said in my question, I don't want people not to want to call police, but how does it have to be a black man? And basically, he had a clean record, never done nothing, but they put him at risk, and they also put the police at risk, with that call. They have better things to do. And I was just wondering, have you guys discussed that? Because, a lot of men that I work with and myself, we out here now and we get nervous now when we see policemen because of what's going on. I never had a record or never did anything. I own 2 companies, but I can walk down the street and get funny looks at by the police like I'm a criminal. But that's not the issue. The issue is, these people now are calling you guys on bogus stuff. And I know you have to look at it, but how do you handle somebody who's going to keep calling you because they just don't like the color of my skin and say, oh, he looks suspicious because he lives in a nice house. Well, I own the house. You didn't see me there. You live across the street, but you're going to call the cops because you just feel like messing with me. I just wonder, how is that handled?
Thank you, Mr. Barnett, for your question. Either Chief Ball or Lieutenant Miller, whichever would like to answer that, feel free.
Yes, sir. Thanks for your question, Mr. Barnett. Very important question. And I think the common denominator to a lot of these unique scenarios rests with the conversation piece. So we have daily conversations. We communicate often about scenarios, things like that. There are roll call trainings that the shift commanders, lieutenants, and sergeants give officers on the patrol shifts, especially when a unique situation like the Ravenna situation would come up. And when I say a communication issue, a lot of times it's incumbent upon, and why we stress on the front end when the call is received in our communication center to dispatch, it's very critical to get very detailed and accurate information. Providing it's not an immediate crisis. That goes back to the whole, if you have time, take time. And our dispatchers as a whole do a great job slowing sometimes callers call and they have anxiety and they're trying to give information quick. And maybe from a distance, to the extent of that Rivanna scenario, his cell phone may have looked like an unknown object to that caller. I'm not sure. Who knows if a particular bias may have played a role in that? We don't know all those circumstances. I know here at Akron, and I'm much like I'm sure any other police department, communication is key with that. So what did you see? What did it look like? What is the person doing? Gather as much information as possible. But the other critical component is what's being relayed to the frontline officer responding to that call. What do they know? What were they told? You know, how accurate was that information? I think a lot of that goes a long way to shape how an officer will then eventually interact. I watched that Rivanna video, and I thought, number one, that the gentleman in the car had exceptional composure, considering, one, then two, then multiple officers, and it had to be an unnerving situation he found himself in. But then the officers, I don't think, at least from the standpoint that I saw, and maybe there were different video, but I didn't see really any overreaction to that. I thought in particular, one officer responded by trying to give as much information as he knew. To your point, Mr. Barnett, that does not minimize the concern or perspective you have for that family member or a situation you may have found yourself in. I know that we are tasked daily with ensuring that our people are armed with the best information and that they approach each situation tactfully, appropriately, and our goal in every encounter is to ensure that every citizen in the community is safe in every situation, or as safe as possible.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. We have another question, but Chief Ball, if you want to chime in on that question before we go to the next panelist.
No, I think Lieutenant Miller covered it well. As a matter of fact, I didn't hear most of the question anyways.
Okay.
There was I was losing audio.
Sure. I understand how that, in the world of Zoom, I understand how that can happen. But in all fairness, we have another panelist who is going to come on the screen, and it's a very familiar name to, I'm sure, many of you. But Sylvia Trundle, welcome to this conversation this evening. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. And it's
You're
really,
welcome.
I really love watching my fellow coworkers just represent our department so well. And that's why I offered the comments that I did, because these two gentlemen really have stood up, at a difficult time to represent our agency, to know that people can be proud of the department that's out there serving them on a daily basis.
It was a great comment.
That's why I wanted to share with Kathy when she asked about what maybe, citizens can do to assist the police and fire departments out there. And we do have two different funds that I highlighted. One being a fund at the Akron Community Foundation that's for Summit County police and fire engagement. And Mike Miller is the epitome of what community engagement's about with the ice cream truck he did several years ago. And so if you contribute to a fund like this at Akron Community Foundation, officers from Summit County can access those funds to do things like what Lieutenant Miller did, whether it's, go out and shoot basketballs with the kids, have a pizza party. It's things that often officers were doing out of their own pockets. So this was just a fund established to help, folks have a better relationship in our community. And the other one that I'm very proud of is our Summit County Safety Forces Support Center. And as you can imagine, with all the critical incidents going on, first responders do need somewhere safe that they can go and have confidential counseling sessions for themselves, and oftentimes even their families are affected by what's going on. And this organization provides those services. And again, donations are always welcome to help support that initiative.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Trundle. Thank you for joining us this evening. And that was some great comments about your colleagues. So thank you very much. I do actually, from the chat, there was an addition to some additional information that was submitted by Mr. Barnett that he wanted to share, is that in speaking about the situation about his relative, he stated that one officer had his gun drawn and the other did not. So could you speak to that as to why that might be? I think he wants to wants to know why those types of situations occur. And I know you don't know specifically, but that's what he threw in the chat.
I know, if you don't mind, I can kind of provide some perspective from a patrol officer standpoint. 18 of my 21 years were spent in the patrol division, and many of that time I was assigned to patrol in a district car. Can't answer specifically how or why one officer will react from a tactical standpoint different than the other, but I can tell you most often it could be a vantage point. So say, for example, one officer might be closer to the car, closer to the window, and has a different perspective. And the other one could be kind of in a cover position, if you will, a little further back, and may not have that perspective. Again, I'm not saying those were the reasons as to why those particular officers did it, but most often, depending on your proximity to the subject or the person, that could dictate who does what and when. Again, to Mr. Barnett's point, that could have turned out to be a bad situation. But fortunately, the officers had poise and patience, and no one was hurt from that situation. And that's much like what we would encourage our officers to do in that situation, which is to slow the situation down where possible. But sometimes you're not afforded that opportunity certainly. But that might account for why one officer did one thing when the other did not.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Miller. And this is actually a comment from our last conversation that we wanted to just place within this conversation this evening. This came from Mrs. Eileen Goldman, and she says, I also feel for the police. Too many have guns, and they have to remember that at every time they stop someone, they have to worry about that. But it's hard to understand why some people are shot running away. The person running may not be guilty of anything, but just are afraid of how they're going to be treated and aren't thinking properly. Can you speak to that particular comment coming from Eileen Goldman?
Sure, I will. Well, there obviously each situation is unique, and there are a number of different factors that play into this. One of the things is that there is pretty much a standard belief in communities that if somebody is shot in the back, that is a heinous act by a police officer. But what people haven't seen, or they haven't been trained in, the fact when somebody is running and they're reaching back to shoot a police officer, they're right-handed, and they're reaching back quickly, that officer shoots, that officer is going to shoot that suspect in the back. So you could have that incident be completely justified, but it's really difficult to say something such a general question and try to put explanation to it without having very specific factors that matter in that case. The Akron Police Department, we had an incident earlier this year or late last year where we had a suspect that was shot, and it was in the lower rear torso and the rear end, I believe. And it was exactly that situation. He had turned and taken a shooting stance against our officers. By the time they had they perceive, it takes a while before that what they see gets to their brain, gets to their muscles in order to respond. And that person was turning suddenly to continue his flight. And so he was struck, and that one I'm sure is going to be ruled justifiable. But those are the circumstances that have come up, and there's a lot of advanced training exactly about the science of those kind of interactions. How long does it take for somebody to perceive a threat? How long then to react to it? So again, from a general answer for a general question.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that response. We actually have another guest, Miss Kelly Urbano, and she is actually going to ask you a question. Ms. Urbano, thank you for joining us. You're on mute. Would you mind asking your question at this time? Thank you. You're still on mute.
Thank you. I just took a
Thank you.
bite. As soon as you said that, I took a bite of something.
Oh, I understand. I understand. Welcome to our
I don't have
conversation
a
this evening.
Yeah, thank you. I don't really have a question anymore. I was just making a comment. I understood Chief Ball, and it's nothing new that hasn't already been said. But when he talked about it being a handful of officers, I just felt the need to say that it has to do more with an entire system that was built from the beginning on harnessing Black people. And it kind of stayed in that system. And I don't think it's the fault of officers who are there now, most of them. It's the history of policing and the institution behind policing. And I also feel for police officers in that all of the fallout from all of the years of discrimination and abuse, police are left to deal with it. The people who benefit from racism and continue to don't really have to do anything. It just seems to, need to have a system change, which is why, I don't like the sound of defund police because it turns people off, but reallocating some money to mental health, to drug addiction counselors to help seems like a good idea. I've seen police officers respond in situations where I just felt like they shouldn't have had to do that, or they shouldn't have been alone. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for joining us this evening, and hang around. And hopefully, I don't know if Chief Ball or Lieutenant Miller have any comments towards that or not.
Yeah, I'd like to. And the criticism of systems that have historically been disfavorable to people for the reasons, whatever those are, it can fit different groups. And there is plenty of room for criticism. There is a need for there to be change. And if you are looking at a modern organization that hasn't adapted, hasn't changed, hasn't looked inside their own organization and made those changes, then there is an extreme room for those kind of criticisms. But that's one of the reasons why Lieutenant Miller and I are, just thrilled with the opportunity to be involved in conversations like this, is because we have a chance to talk about those kind of things and what the Akron Police Department has done over the last, 20 years, 25 years that I've been able to witness, 29 years of my career. And, I'll say that when I came on, there was a different attitude among police officers. And there was a more heavy-handedness in the way that people responded. And there was an expectation if somebody fought with the police, it wasn't going to be just controlling that individual. It was going to be punishment involved. And that's not the Akron Police Department in 2020. It hasn't been the Akron Police Department for many, many years, because we have evolved and we have taken very specific and distinctive professional steps. Our training has improved. Some of it, I would say, certainly I would give credit to criticism that was placed on law enforcement as a profession, that it was needed. When we are doing background investigation and interviews of new candidates and promotional interviews inside of our organization, there is a very stringent requirement and an emphasis on a servanthood heart. Do they understand the role of what police officer looks like and what we are going to require our officers to be? And, guy doesn't walk through the door 6'3", 220 and 10% body fat. And we go, all right, you're hired. We want to see what's it look like inside a year. How is it going to translate into the job that we're supposed to do that's taking care of the people that we interact, make their situation better. They call us when things aren't going really well at all. And all of those calls are not going to end up great when we have to arrest people and do the job that we're required to do. But whatever it is, we're going to try to make it better before we leave there. And sometimes it's with patience and strong communication and us being able to show a genuine empathy that we have in those particular situations. So I understand the comments about the history. But I also would say, examine our department, and we want to be transparent, and that's why we love to talk about this.
If there's time, I'd like to piggyback on that too, because, I have a front row seat to a lot of the work that the men and women in patrol are doing, the folks over in the investigative unit are doing. And that's an outstanding question, first of all. And it gives us yet another opportunity. We understand as an agency from top to bottom that a critique sharpens the sword, and our sword is held high with a commitment, and we renew that commitment every day to serve this community at the highest fashion possible. There's oftentimes, humanize the badge and show our humanity, and there are a lot of our community policing programs are actually geared for just that. But I wish, and I'll go back to the critique sharpens the sword. I wish more people had an opportunity to walk the halls of this building. Obviously, COVID doesn't prevent that right now. Would have an opportunity to be up close or sit next to our officers, in particular in patrol, listen to some of the stories and how they're impacted by some of these calls. And I'm reminded of a call. Unfortunately, it resulted in one of our homicides with one of our young people, a 14-year-old girl, a few months back. We had a brand new officer. I think it's day 2 or 3 on the street. He did not share the ethnicity and race of the particular victim. But imagine a 2-day officer on the street jumping right in and performing CPR, fighting desperately to save someone who looked nothing like him. I take that back to sharpen the sword. Officers do not flinch. They haven't flinched. I've seen it on the patrol side. I'm sure same way on the investigative side. And these are just reminders of the, when you're called to action, there's no time for the ancillary messiness of society to come into play and interfere. We have an absolute duty to perform and try to enhance safety and save people's lives. And this rookie officer who was on the street for 2 days, less than 3 days, that was an exemplary example of that commitment. And another incident where unfortunately the 8-year-old was shot and killed on Roselle, West Akron, off of Manchester. One of our officers, because of the critical care needed to that victim, essentially jumped in the driver's seat of the paramedic unit, the EMS, and drove that EMS unit to the hospital. That officer, looking nothing like the child victim, but did everything he could to get her to the hospital so paramedics can have both hands trying to help save that child's life. And there are tons of other examples. I give it to you not as a cliche response, but I know that our men and women in this police department I've worked with, sat next to, are absolutely committed to protecting this community without question.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. I can feel your passion about when you talk about your colleagues. So thank you for that. I actually have, as time is winding down, I actually have Reverend Lori Porter. I actually had her closing, but I guess she had a question. So we're going to let her come in and ask her question real quickly, if you don't mind. And then we're going to we have a few more questions and then we'll close up. Reverend Porter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't help but think that or wonder how much of what we see sometimes can be associated with information that's being communicated to officers when people are calling in. Because I personally had an experience where I was literally here 7 minutes away from where I live, and my grandson texted me and said, just thought you'd want to know the police are in the driveway. There's about 4 cop cars outside. Somebody pulled in our driveway and ran. And I'm like, I mean, he's 15, he's cool as a cucumber about it. Not me, right? Because he's Black and in America. And so I said to him, well, whose car is it? What does it look like? And he says, Nana, nobody we know. And so I immediately call 911, which normally I would call the non-emergency number just in case somebody is really, having an emergency. But my dad, who's 90 years old with dementia, is in the house. My grandson's 15. So I call and say, this is what's going on. We don't know the person that's in the driveway. The operator says whatever she says. And I say to her, I said, well, I'm not there, so I'm concerned because they don't know who's in the house and they don't know that this person in the driveway is not related to us and we don't know this person. Thinking to myself that the officers, they're in blue, but they have nerves and they can be anxious and it can be scary for them. So I wanted to kind of create just an opportunity for them to be confident that they didn't have any problems coming from inside the house. And the operator said to me, well, I'm not there either. Is it pardon me? Right, as I could have got a ticket that day, because I'm just going to tell you, Chief Paul, Officer Miller, Chief Miller, y'all could have gave me a ticket because I probably drove 65 because there's 4 police cars and the 2 that I love are inside the house. So how much do you think plays a part of some of what we see? What part of that do you think is contributed to how communication is given to the officers?
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Porter.
Well, there always are those risks that are involved. That if communication is not tight, specific, that there could be a problem. The reality of it is we see far more often that it is the other way. Our officers may not get enough information in going to the call, and they could be put at risk. There's also a tendency, and we see this most frequently of the 3 issues, where callers will report that there are firearms involved because they're hoping that'll expedite the response of our police officers. So our officers are going, the expectation is there's a gun involved, and that immediate encounter is going to be different. The officers are going to be at a distance. They may have their firearms out, especially if they can't see the hands of an individual that was reported to be involved. Now, obviously, we haven't had those circumstances where they've ended up in use of deadly force for our department, but if that information is really important. And I can tell you, our call takers and our dispatch center, they are equally exceptional. Their training is constant. They're very up to date. Their policies and procedures are all modeled after best practices in the industry, and they too don't stop. Their learning doesn't stop, and the way that they operate is never just completely standard. It's exceptionally fluid too. But I'll talk to our communications captain about it and make sure that let him know that comment came up today, and we'll see if there's anything that we're missing. But we'll be open to it. We appreciate you bringing that to us.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Reverend Porter. And before we only have a few more minutes with you gentlemen this evening. But before we actually continue in our conversation, Chief, as you know, we all read some articles in the paper this week, and you were featured in that article, and you were referenced as expressing some frustration and anger. Would you mind sharing with us this evening, kind of on a personal level, where you are as far as the frustration and the anger with how people may be viewing the Akron Police Department versus other departments throughout the country who may be engaging in wrongdoing, knowing that the APD is not, but sometimes all the men and women that are in blue are castigated in the same way. Can you kind of speak to us about your frustration and your anger?
Sure.
That's not a gotcha question. That's just I think that people would want to kind of hear from you.
Well, that morning, and I mentioned this in that conversation. That morning, I'd read an article about 2 sheriff's deputies in Los Angeles County that were ambushed, sitting in their cruiser. Suspect walked up and point blank fired at both of them, hitting them multiple times. There was a 31-year-old female in the car, and then also I think 28-year-old male that was in the car. And there were people that were cheering it outside or around the area of the shooting. And it was so hurtful to see that. And then when the ambulances took the 2 officers to a hospital for emergency treatment, there were already people that were organized there that were blocking the entrance to the emergency room. So it was delaying their treatment. And there were also people outside of the hospital, that same group, that were chanting, "We hope they die." And it just is devastating, because when I see something like that, I mean, everybody else, I think the community sees something happen in a different jurisdiction, and they own it for whatever reason that is. And I can't say that that's not right or wrong. Well, I also own those things with law enforcement, and I think all of the criticisms that, and I'm not saying all the criticisms are unjust, but there is much of the criticisms that are unjust, and they make our neighborhoods less safe, and they put our officers at greater risk. And that really is hard to deal with as the leader of an organization, and you feel for the safety of all your people. And you know that those growing divisions are not going to work to make our neighborhood safer. We're not going to have a safer Akron 5 years from now if this continues to evolve, and there has to be 2 sides in an issue. And it was a kind of an outpouring of that feeling at the moment, and so it was heartfelt. The things that I said were true. It was not the best moment, time, or place for that interview. I didn't know it was going to be public. It wasn't my intent to house our city business publicly like that, but I certainly was specific in my comments, and I know that it frustrated some people, because council was, they were there to participate in a collective effort. I did repeat several times, it's not going to change our participation. It won't change the way that we approach it. We'll do it like we do everything. We'll do it with whole hearts, and we'll do it with a sincere willingness to examine ourselves, or to be, to be looked at by others as well. But I think that kind of got lost because of my comments, which you're aware of.
Well, I know you outside of this conversation, and I know, I think I kind of have an idea of who you are as a person. And I know that you have a heart for people, and that was not a got you question, but because it was made public and it was placed in the news, a lot of times the public doesn't get a chance to see the personal side as to whom a lot of you officers are outside of the uniform. And so I wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of share that, because some may formulate an opinion based off of what they read versus actually asking you the question and giving you the opportunity to explain it one-on-one. So thank you for that explanation. And since we're actually drawing down on time, there are some questions. There's a lot of questions that we actually have from our previous conversation. But one of the questions that has kind of been persisting is your opinions of the Citizens Review Board. Are you pro or con, for it or against it, as far as APD having a Citizens Review Board? What is your take on that?
Well, here is a perspective, and I think it uses real life situations to help support the position that I have. Another law enforcement agency from a larger urban department in the state of Ohio, not too long ago, was examined by the Department of Justice. Federal government comes in and looks at who they are, how they operate, what's their local history, or what's their recent history been. And that report that was put out by the federal government had determined that there were many areas that they needed to address. And they put out a summary and listed 10 specific points. And when I first got that report and saw that summary, APD was doing 1 through 9 already. So all of those issues with, the other, another large department in the state of Ohio, we had 1 through 9 covered on our own impetus, inside of our organization, men and women that are in tune enough to know that if there's a change that needs to be made, we're going to pursue that. And I think that lends itself a long way to say, if we're getting it right like that all the time, the troubles that can come with the civilian review board when people aren't trained in law enforcement, haven't had any experience or exposure to what use of force is like, or some of our other policies and procedures, it is very difficult for them to be able to come in and to be able to say something happened that was right here or justifiable here, or this is unacceptable. So I'm not in favor of civilian review board, but I am very much in favor of transparent processes. We don't have anything to hide. The way that we operate ought to be on display for people so that they can know that they can have trust in our organization. So I am not averse to scrutiny. We invite it because that's the kind of organization we are. But I don't believe personally that civilian review board is the way to the way to fix the issues that people believe are happening with law enforcement in this jurisdiction.
Sure. Thank you for that response, Chief Ball. And unfortunately, we have kind of run out of time, and we have come to the conclusion of our conversation. So before we actually conclude, and we actually have Reverend Porter close us out, are there any closing thoughts that either yourself or Lieutenant Miller would like to share before we conclude this conversation? Lieutenant Miller, you're muted.
Just real quick, I know it's been said, it's a reoccurring theme. We're here, we're present, we're open to these conversations. Any area that we have to sharpen our sword, we're committed to doing that. But if there's areas that our sword has already been sharpened, for example, we've taken additional steps to enhance the transparency component by well in advance, revising, renewing many of our policies. And we just recently placed our key policies and procedures, made them available online as an additional step to enhance that transparency. But if our sword is sharpened and we are in step with guidelines and recommendations in advance from some of the recommendations, then I think that's a moment for us to shine and tell ourselves that we were progressive in that way. But certainly we're committed moving forward, look forward to additional opportunities to further the conversation.
And I'll
Thank you, sir.
I'll tag on to that. For example, somebody brought it to our attention within the last couple of weeks that they thought it would be a good idea for our Office of Professional Standards for their procedures, their policies to be put online. We had them online within 2 days because it was a good recommendation. It certainly is not information that we would want to keep from the community. So that's an example. We have redone all of our procedures, as a matter of fact, within the last year, unprecedented. Some of those procedures were from 1991, which was the year that I was hired 29 years ago. We also added new procedure this year, and this was on anti-bias. We have an anti-bias procedure in the Akron Police Department that states out, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in our organization, and an accountability track to that as well. So I think these conversations can be very good, and we are going to continue to participate. And it's also nice, it gives us a chance too to hear some affirming information from some of the people that are with us. So thank you very much for the opportunity tonight.
Sure. Chief Ball, thank you. Lieutenant Miller, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to join with us. We really appreciate it. We know that you have other things going on, and you decided to spend this time with us. So sincerely, from 100 Black Men in Love Akron, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we wish you Godspeed. In closing, we're going to actually turn over to Reverend Lori Porter of Love Akron to close us out. Thank you all.
Yeah, This was great tonight. Thank you all. I'm excited to be here, filling in for Coach Kemp. You know, it's football season, so you guys might not see him periodically and you get stuck with me. Just want to remind you all that this kind of initiative, this kind of conversation is going on many platforms within Love Akron. We call it United Through Love. And so our relationship with 100 Black men, what we do on 3rd and 4th Wednesdays at 1:30, the Black and White conversation is to do exactly what we're doing tonight. Help us to develop meaningful relationships so that we can unite our community and hopefully the world through love. So thank you all for hanging out with us tonight. We look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thank you for having us.